Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Frustrated by Your Marketing podcast. My name is Jim D'Amico. I'm your host, and today I am joined by Justin Chen. He is the co-founder of PickFu. On his LinkedIn, he says it's the DIY enterprise-grade consumer research for anybody, which I think is great. We're going to talk about that a bunch today. It's the affordable and easy-to-use alternative to focus groups. I think that's the what we used to do in the old days. I actually have never put one of those together because they're hard to do, they're expensive, and now you can do that within, I don't know, you had on LinkedIn a couple of days ago or a couple of weeks ago, the fastest PickFu in history was minutes, so the turnaround time is ultra fast, which is great as well. So welcome, Justin. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. Looking forward to it.
And then the other thing we're going to talk about today is, Justin's team at PickFu is fully remote, just like our team at Skyline. Their team's a little bit bigger. I think when we spoke in December, it was 20 people. I don't know if it's still 20 people or if it's grown since then. But I think it's great that you're doing that. It's one of our missions at Skyline to, not to make people commute to an office. You can get a lot of work done from all over the world, and there's no reason to force your team into one container, I guess is what most companies do. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today as well.
Great.
So let's start there. Like I said, it's a mission of Skyline, and it sounds like, I don't know if it's part of your mission, but it sounds like something that you embrace fully at PickFu as well. How have you found that? Do you do any in-person at all, or has it been 100% remote? Have you done any meetups, or how do you work that landscape of remote work?
Yeah. So when my co-founder John and I founded the company, we were never in the same place. So we've been working together for, 16 plus years, and we've never been in the same place. When we first started, I was in Chicago, he was in Seattle. Then I moved back to LA, and then he moved to San Francisco. And so we kept working together. And as we scaled the team, we always thought it would be only fair to be fully remote, because we were fully remote, and we found it to be incredibly productive for ourselves and able to have the work-life balance that we wanted. So we've always been very intentional about being remote way before COVID. But yeah, we've always gotten together. We started getting together, every few months. And as we've scaled the team, what we do now is we get at least the leadership in person about once a year. We haven't been able to do a full team get together just because logistically it's very difficult, and we scaled most of the team in the past few years during COVID. So we haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. We do want to do it. It's definitely on the radar. But yeah, we try to get in person once a year, kind of like the leadership, and we'll do some team building stuff. We'll do some planning activities. So that's always helpful, but it's always funny because by the time you meet someone in person, you kind of already know them from all the interaction you've done on Zoom and Slack and like all these things. And so it's always odd because I always feel like we've already met, but
Right.
Maybe there's like a height thing that's not quite right, but like that's usually the only thing that's off.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned COVID, and so I know we spoke about this when we were doing our pre-call a couple weeks ago. So we've been fully remote from day one. So it's been a sales point for our company for hiring. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and every business
everyone was
became fully remote. And I said, okay, I guess we're going to lose that advantage, because there are advantages to working for big companies, stock options, and all the things that come with working with a mega corporation. And we can't compete with those, and you can't either. I know, even though you're larger than Skyline, there are these companies with tens of thousands of employees they have a different structure.
Sure.
And people, they pick who they want to work for. And so one of the things that was a huge advantage for smaller companies like ours was this ability to make your life and have that balance to go to the kids' sports game during the day, or take off early on Fridays and work with your team, work with your boss, and be available. Yep. And then again, COVID sort of took that all away. But within a year, it all went back. Like it's as if it never happened, which I'm shocked by.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know why. I think maybe they're not hiring well, or they don't trust their employees, or they don't know how to manage them well, or I'm not sure. But it's strange to me that that the Elon Musks of the world have done a 180 on that so fast?
I think it's not just something you can. I think they probably found that it's not something you just turn on, and if you don't hire appropriately, not everyone works effectively independently and in a remote situation. I know that for John and myself, as we were working on our business remotely, a lot of the growth and kind of like the struggle was actually in personal productivity and kind of like learning how to work independently and at home, finding those right boundaries. And I think if you take a workforce that's never done that before and a company that's never done that before and just kind of throw them into remote, I can see why, maybe old markers for productivity like didn't work anymore, and individuals didn't have like workspaces set up properly. They just didn't know how to set the boundaries, all this kind of stuff. And I could see why maybe it didn't work for a lot of companies. And still, you meet people, even when you're trying to hire, I'm sure that would probably prefer to go into an office because maybe they're younger, they want some camaraderie or whatever. There's so many reasons for it. And so I definitely see that maybe it's not the perfect fit for everyone. I am surprised, like you are, by the max return to the office, because I feel like so many people who are effective at working at home are kind of, getting their lives upended because they found a new balance. I know a lot of other parents who, found a new balance where they're able to pick up their kids and go to these activities because of the remote work. And then all of a sudden now they've got to add the 1 to 2 hour commute back into their schedule. And it's, incredibly frustrating to, turn your life around like that again.
Yeah. And so you made a good point, and you're right. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that it doesn't work for every company. I'm just surprised it worked for none of them. Yeah. And, it literally went from, 80% of companies were fully remote. I mean, obviously not by choice, but during COVID, I thought some of them would have retained it, and almost none of them have. And it's, and your co-founder posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, I think, and it was a great post. And it was like, sometimes I work at 4 a.m. Sometimes I am off in the afternoon. Yeah. Sometimes I have to, clock out to go again, take my kid to some practice. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's about getting your job done. And I think that's, and it was a post, I think, about himself and also for sort of your employees and, and sort of for the world in general. And it's true. And if you have that trust, the piece that we have at Skyline is just let me know. There's very rarely going to be a no, you can't do that. Right. Just, less than half an hour ago, after this recording, I'm going to have a meeting with Molly, who does our social media marketing at Skyline, and we were going to meet at 3:30, and she's got to, I think, pick up her roommate from work today. Could we move it a half an hour? Of course. And so, why would I say no to that? Like, there's no reason why we have to meet at exactly 3:30 today. It could be at 4 or 3:45 or whatever. So I don't know. Again, I don't know why some businesses don't have that flexibility, and I don't know, why that I guess that exists, that lack of trust. Yeah. And I think it comes down to maybe inability to communicate too, because let somebody know I won't be here now. I'm going to make it up at a different time. The deadline is the deadline, but you have to work in that team as well. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I think it's incredibly rare that there's some urgency to a certain meeting or maybe some internal deadlines. And so as long as you communicate, like you said, like there is flexibility to either shift things around or get the work done on your own schedule. And to your point about communication, again, I think working remotely just requires and forces all of us to be more communicative, more explicitly communicative, whether that's verbally in the meetings or on Slack or writing more. But that's the good thing, right? Because like now you're documenting more. And one of the things that we try to do with, Slack is to try to treat it as asynchronous, because it's supposed to be. And, your messages shouldn't necessarily be super short, like, hey, you're there, and then like expecting a synchronous communication. Like, try to put as much into like, maybe they're not going to come back. Maybe they're not there for a few hours. So like try to get it all down in a message, because it is supposed to be asynchronous back and forth. And so just getting in a better habit about getting as much out there in written form, and doing more documentation. It's a good habit for anyone, and I think it's probably like a habit that has to be built through experience.
Yes, and yeah, that is another, like you said, it's not for everybody. And I mean, it's easy for me to say everybody could do this. I've been doing it for 20 years. You've been doing it for, 13 or 14 years. So we've gotten really good at it, but anybody could do it if you sort of work on that skill set. And asynchronous is my favorite. And this is something that COVID gave to me, was the Zoom. And the other one I use now a lot is, so we use ClickUp as our content, or as our project management software, just like and so in there's the ability to essentially do a Loom.
Yep.
And there's also loom.com. So I am constantly recording, and I hope that my team doesn't get too annoyed by it, but I'm constantly recording. If the email or the message is longer than a few sentences or a few points, usually I can express it much more easily by recording doing a screen recording, like, hey, I think we need to move this color over here, or I ran this Pik Fu poll, and based on this, I think we should do, this would be my transition into what we really need to be talking about today. So if we had run a poll, I would share my screen and I'd say, listen, this is our feedback. Here's what I think here's how I think we need to react to it and for the next iteration.
Yep.
And that's really hard to do in an email.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's also hard to get a bunch of different people's schedules to meet at the exact same time, unless it's pre-scheduled. So if you're going to quickly pivot on something, it's a great way to do it. And again, I'm not asking you to be available at, 2:46 p.m. right now. I'm asking you to be available sometime in the next hour or so to listen to this and react. And it's better because you don't stop people's flow. You don't get in their way, but it's as if it's sort of the equivalent of knocking on the door, in their office in the real world, versus, but at the same time, I'm not interrupting them.
Yep.
I'm sort of interrupting them when they have their next break.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we do that. I don't know if you've ever done Looms or
we use Looms all the time. I love it when the team gives me Looms, because also I can watch it faster. So like it's not even a replacement. It's not even like a 20 minute for 20 minute. It's like, I can know 1.5, maybe 2x and get the same information. A lot of times they do really good transcripts and summaries as well. So like you can kind of like see the recap if maybe it goes a little rambly. So yeah, we use Looms a lot, and also it's a good documentation for training as well. So like if you write out an SOP for the team and then also have a Loom kind of like walk through it, I think it's a good complement to embed the two together. So it's a great tool.
Yeah. So I guess to summarize this, I think it's great that you're doing it. I'm glad that others are doing it. I'm sort of selfishly also glad that corporate America has returned back to the old ways, because it gives us a competitive advantage as we grow our companies. But I do think that maybe it was just a little bit too soon. 10, 15 years from now, I think that in our knowledge economy, most people are going to be doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like, we're working in our home offices or our work shares or wherever it is, and we go back to our life within, it's a 1 minute commute instead of a 1 hour commute. And
I think especially if you consider a lot of the younger generation that had to go through school and are already doing everything natively digitally, their expectation for work is probably going to be fully remote, and going into the office is going to feel incredibly weird to them. So I suspect, like you said, in the next 10, 15 years, after this generation who's done Zoom school, and even as I think a lot of school has returned, there's a lot more recordings and online things. I think their expectations are going to be very different than the current workforce.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that was sort of an aside that I wanted to do because I was really excited that you had done this. Let's talk about PickFu. Again, it's the affordable and easy to use alternative to that focus group. So prepping for this, it's now a few weeks, so it'll be a little new to me because I did all this prep back in December, but I do remember a lot of it. So the story that I remember was this came, as any good idea, came out of necessity. So your first company was not PickFu, and you and your partner put together PickFu to help iterate for another company that you had, and that it sort of became the main company. So can you tell me that story real quick and sort of how this came out of necessity, which again, I think is is great, and most great ideas have that similar type
story. So years ago, John and I were working on a different company together. It was a website, and we were doing a redesign for it. We had 2 different redesigns options from our designer, and we were trying to pick which one was best. Up to that point, we were used to kind of asking friends and family and all that kind of stuff. But, as any entrepreneur knows, once you start asking your friends and family a bunch of times, like they kind of get sick of giving you feedback, and they start saying things like, oh, whatever you choose is probably best. And it's, not useful anymore. So also, they're not really our target audience, but it was, convenient. So we decided to build a solution to gather feedback for ourselves. Around that time, the whole lean startup idea was going around, and kind of getting out of your office to go talk to people in coffee shops and getting real feedback. Being engineers and introverts, we also didn't want to go into a coffee shop and talk to anyone. So we figured, is there a way that we could build a digital focus group so that we can gather like this real world feedback from strangers without having to leave our house? And so that's where PickFu was born. And so we built a prototype where we were able to compare 2 different options. We went out, we paid people to respond to them online. And it was incredibly useful for ourselves. So we slapped a PayPal button on it at the time and shared it with other entrepreneurs, and, didn't really think much of it because we were still focused on this other business. And so it started gaining traction on its own, and the feedback for it was incredible. People said like, oh, this saved me so much time. And we started seeing all kinds of different use cases for it, which was really cool. In the beginning, one of the earliest ones that we didn't foresee was authors actually testing book titles and book covers. Tim Ferriss had written about how he used Google Ads to test the 4-Hour Workweek title and kind of used data to choose the right title. And so it became very popular to be data-driven about book titles and book covers, and PickFu fit in really well because it was much easier than running Google Ads, as anyone who's tried to run ads can attest. And so,
right,
we had a lot of self-publishing authors testing it out, because they don't have a publisher and an editor to give them this, this advice on like what title and cover to use. So yeah, that was kind of our first customer segment that it really took hold. We found like an interesting use case for them, and then it kind of evolved into a few different ones. We had some gaming companies using it, and then most recently a lot of e-commerce sellers, so people selling online, doing product concept testing or main images or marketing copy, kind of anything that you want to test before you invest a significant amount of time or resources into.
Absolutely. That's great. And so the other thing that I've heard you say and read in your LinkedIn is that this is best used when it's in small iterations. So it's not something you're going to test things that the answer to, right? But
yeah.
You're going to test things that, like you said, you're going to put a big chunk of money into. So
yeah,
if it's a book title or time, right? So if it's a book title, you've now spent months or years of time writing something, and the number, you can't change that after the fact, or at least if you did, it would be very difficult to do, and that can affect book sales.
Yeah,
on a pretty significant factor. Or if you're investing in creating a product and having it developed, you're now putting a lot of sunk costs in that. So better to iterate on the product prior to,
right,
I'm now going to market. It's already been, it's been developed. We've got the logo, we've got everything. Now, can you help me pick my Amazon image? Versus best to start, on that journey early.
Yeah.
And grow with it, I guess. Is that?
Yeah. I'll tell you a common customer journey that we see is that people will come to us because they've got a product that's not selling well. So maybe they're selling on Amazon or some kind of marketplace, and it's a very competitive landscape. So what they'll do is they'll test out their main image against like their competitors, whatever, a teapot or something. And they'll test it out on PickFu to try to understand like why it's not doing well. What inevitably happens is the feedback that they give, because we get all this written feedback. Not only do the people vote, but they write down why. And a lot of the written feedback will actually say, oh, I don't like your branding, I don't like your logo, or your packaging sucks, or the product just doesn't look as good. And these guys are just trying to get feedback on the image. They just want to change the layout. They don't want. Right. They already sunk $50,000 or something into the product, and it's sitting in a warehouse somewhere, and they're trying to sell it. But all this feedback is about things that they've already made decisions probably didn't gather too much data on, and it was a lot of assumptions and the team making those decisions. And so what we try to educate people is that you need to start earlier in the process. So even as you're iterating on your company name or your product name or your branding, get that feedback early so that your target audience isn't negatively reacting to it later. As you're designing the product, do they want the handle in that style? Do they want that color variation? As you're designing the packaging, is the packaging going to resonate? So there's all these micro decisions that we're making. And if we wait all the way to the end, people are going to negatively react in a lot of different ways. And it's going to be really hard to make that change or even pinpoint like what specific thing, because it's not one specific thing anymore. It's 100 different decisions everything being made. And we've seen people testing. We have an example on our website of someone's testing some packaging design, and I'm not great at color. I'm like red-green colorblind, but I could barely discern that there's like a color variation in the font. And so to me, they all pretty much look the same, but the breakdown in the responses is overwhelming for one particular color. And so it's funny because I think to most people, it'd be like, oh, whatever, like they all look the same, just pick one and go. But clearly there was a strong preference for one of the factors. And I think what's really cool is seeing our customers iterating on these really small things that maybe you don't think are significant. Maybe it's a font, like maybe a serif or not sans serif or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, people have reactions to these things. And especially if it doesn't resonate with maybe the brand or the type of product that you're selling, like that's the biggest issue a lot of times is people won't test this kind of resonance, whether it's the packaging design or even your marketing creatives. Like, oh, like that's weird. Like I thought you were a kitchen and home goods company. Why is your brand name say something tech? Like that. It's a weird juxtaposition, and so all those factors go into people's buying behavior and things that should be tested early on.
Absolutely, yeah. And so in a minute or two, I'm going to share. So you ran a Pik Fu on our Frustrated by Your Marketing cover image with an Amazon cover image versus two other marketing podcasts. And I want to share my screen in a second or two and show everybody what exactly that feedback is. Yeah. And so when I do that, you're going to see, one new thing that I know you added in the last year, I believe, was, again, AIs in everything. So there's a nice AI summarization.
Yep.
And then I think so that's helpful. Obviously, you get the tone of what the feedback was. So at the very basic, if I'm understanding this from what I'm seeing, at the very basic, you get who won, right? So we won, which is great. So thumbs up for Frustrated by Your Marketing on that one. Then you get this nice 3 or 4 paragraph summary as to why. Yep. And then what I think would be the most helpful, so if I was starting from scratch, let's say we had met before we started this whole podcast, which is, and I'll quick aside here, one of my favorite parts of doing this podcast journey has been sort of learning about new products, meeting new people. Like we would not have been having this conversation obviously otherwise. And maybe I wouldn't have ever heard of PickFu or gotten to meet you, Justin. So it's been great to kind of do that. But let's pretend though we had met prior to, I had already known you prior to doing it. I would have tested out the title, although that's one of our title is one of our core taglines. So I was rooting for that to win, but for all I know, it's a terrible name. I think it's good. We would have tested out the cover images and we would have gotten that. And it's very granular, the feedback, and I'll show that in a second. And then you even can dig down into demographic information, which I think if you have bigger sample sizes, our sample size was 15, so if I understand correctly, 15 is your starting point. So $15 is your starting point to do this. So it's $1 a vote or $1 a poll,
response,
a response started with 15. So the demographic info obviously will have more weight as you have a bigger sample size. Yeah. But it is still very interesting, some of the things that I can see in there, even with only 15.
Yeah.
But again, the thing that I'm excited about and that I'm going to use even just from this sort of after the fact test is what people actually took the time to say. Mm-hmm. There's like very, very specific feedback. So it's a good panel it's not, I guess I get the impression it's not people just sitting on their couch doing this while they're watching TV. They're taking it seriously.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of effort trying to make sure that the data quality is high, and so we tap into the same consumer panels that a Procter and Gamble or Kraft might use with their expensive consumer research teams, but we take a different approach to it. We are able to layer in our own methodologies for data quality and also for audience targeting to make sure that every response that you are purchasing, it is someone that's genuinely and with good intention trying to answer it. And so, like you said, the feedback is very specific, and that is where the true value is, because that's where you're able to iterate on the next version. And so, in the example that you're going to show, like we were testing it against some of your competitors in the space, but now that you've got some feedback, you could, if you were to update your image, you could take that feedback and go back with your designer and say like, all right, well, maybe we're going to incorporate, these 3 things that people said, and we'll test it out against maybe our old version, see if it does better. And if it does, let's retest it against the competition, see if it, does even better. And so that's kind of the process that we typically see for kind of anything that's in a competitive atmosphere, which is, most things. So whether it's app icons or book covers or product images, kind of baselining it against your competition, then iterating based on all that written feedback. And that might take a few times for you to get it right. And sometimes it goes in different directions. And it's like, all right, well, that iteration didn't do any better. Let's go back to what the feedback was and see if we can go in the right direction. And then just really making sure before you go live with it to then validate it against the competition again, to know that, okay, cool, I'm going to go out with very high confidence that this is going to do well in the open marketplace. And this is what all of our most successful customers are doing. This is the process that they follow.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know when my personal first PickFu is going to be, which is I'm very intrigued by the Mr. Beast cover photos on YouTube and how well they do that, like big cheesy grin, open smile. Yep. And if you look at, marketing podcasts, photography podcasts, or YouTube's, and this is a podcast, but we're heavily YouTube focused, they do that. So I actually don't know the history of who came first on that, but I have to get some cheesy photos done. But I want to test, how much trust is lost versus how much click-through rate is gained by that. So that's my plan for my first one to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me share my screen here, and I'm going to go through the one that you did for us. Okay, so PickFu.com, nice logo. So I'm going to go through it to tell what I like and how this is, first of all, it's really nice that you can just share these results with anybody. Yeah. Right. So you were able to share this with me. I haven't set up my account yet. So this is just, you can share it with your coworkers. You can share it with, if you're doing this as an agency, you could share it with your clients. They don't have you're setting this. So that in itself is like very user friendly. I like that you set up the scene, right? So instead of just saying like, which one do you like better? You tell them what you're asking, right? So this is great. So business marketing podcast, you didn't ask them to interpret that. You told them that ahead of time. And then obviously, which would you click? So that I think is great. Obviously, you're going to want a short question. I'm assuming this is about as long as they should be, maybe 3 lines at the most. But I think that's great. And then you give the 3 options. So I didn't ask you this when we talked last time, but I assume these, you show A always at the end, but it varies as you're showing it.
It's randomized. It's for each respondent, it's randomized. So the option label is consistent. So it may be like CBA or BAC or whatever it is, so that in the feedback that it makes sense.
Okay.
But the order is randomized that they see it.
Okay. So sometimes B is here in the A slot or whatever. Okay. Yeah. Got it. Is the one you want to pick ever not A? Like, so it's not so obvious?
Yeah. It doesn't matter where you put it.
So you could put yours in B.
Oh yeah. I'm sure it would have been the same response if it was in B. Yeah.
No, I think it would have too. But yeah, so you can totally randomize it as you're doing.
Oh yeah. It just so happened that yours was in the first spot. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So again, 10 response out of the 15 picked us, which is great. And number 2 is Paul Brains over here, which is nice. And then you get Ken Jones with 1. Then you get this really nice AI summary. There's a lot of talk about them saying that they like the professional design of our image, which is great. There was a lot. They like the title. They responded to the frustration of marketing, which is why we picked it. And a lot of people liked that it was Madison and I as co-hosts, so the male-female perspective.
Yeah, that's good.
Which was also great. And I don't know if this matters, but the other sort of piece of Madison and I is, the age difference that wasn't mentioned. But I think that's great. I like the fact that she's younger and I'm older, and we can kind of talk from different generations as well. Good, so she's in Gen Z, I'm Gen X. That might not have been, as clear here.
Yeah.
Or maybe people didn't want to say that I'm really old. But I think that's great. So, so you get this, I'm not going to read through the whole thing right now, but you get this summary. And if you're, at the very least, you've already gotten your money's worth there. Then you can drill down to all the specific responses and see exactly what they said. So this is the order. And most of the people went ABC.
Yep.
And then at least I think everybody that picked us went in that order. Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's also interesting to see kind of the orders.
Interesting. That is interesting. Yeah.
And then those that picked number or letter B, the order was a little bit all over the place as to why. So you could probably interpret some stuff from that as well. So if somebody liked this, they might not like us for some reason. But then again, you can literally read the specific messaging here. So I think everyone feels frustrated with marketing. So the title really speaks to me. Like, that's cool for us to know.
Mm-hmm.
It reinforces me liking the title.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's great. And then again, there's some talk about the background color. They like the background color. They liked the fact that it was a male and a female host. They liked that there were two hosts and there would be a discussion. That's over here.
Mm-hmm.
So this all reinforces why we picked stuff, and it would have been, it would have reinforced what we did in the past. And again, I think if we were iterating against ourselves, which I wanted to do, it will help us to make decisions. Then you get the demographic information. You can see that we were less popular, in this small demographic range with younger audiences and more popular with older audiences. I also thought it was interesting that the only one I think we lost on was on income range. So, but if you look at it, and again, I would love to see this with a larger audience, which I may do. If you go back here, I don't know, if I had a high net worth, maybe Paul Green is the guy to go to. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like, he does look, he looks a little bit more
traditional,
financially,
right? Yeah.
Exactly. A little more traditional, maybe a little more financially savvy. So I get it. It makes sense to me. So you could drill down there. Very cool. And then there are the highlights. So this, again, takes that sentence that they gave you and they gives you some feedback. So what people thought of the graphic design, the image, the clarity of message, and so on. And it kind of breaks down what people liked and didn't like for all the different responses. So it gives you it in all different directions. It gives you the raw data. It analyzes it for you. And, from here, this would have been the last step. But if I was, when I do this test with the Mr. Beast type cover photos, I'm going to take my photo and maybe Gary V or whoever else, and I'm going to put those next to each other, and I'm going to be able to, I probably won't pick someone that's super well known.
Yeah.
But because I think that would skew it as well. But I'll pick a few, and then I'll be able to say, like, okay, after all this iteration, I didn't go too smiley, but a little bit more eye-catching. How did it work?
Yeah. I guess you can make variations that are similar to theirs, but it's you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. We can play around with our colors. I mean, we're fairly set with our name at this point.
Yeah.
But the colors, the logo, all of that can change, and so we can iterate on that as we look to increase our click-through rates on YouTube, which is really, again, we're a podcast, but YouTube has been our focus. And so whatever I can do to increase by a few percentage points, when you have thousands of people seeing it, you get even like 0.5 percentage point increases your viewership. So that's what it's all about. And so that's for us. And, I know you mentioned, one of the big markets for you is on game app design. So when someone's scrolling through the hundreds and thousands of apps on there, what's going to make you click on this specific app versus another one? Again, a 0.5% bump could be hundreds of downloads in a given year or a month.
Yeah.
On Amazon, it's really all about that's the name of the game, getting someone to click into your as you're scrolling through. Aside from what you're paying for, there's you're paying for premium listings as well. But once you get past those few ads, then it's a free for all, right? And it's all about like which one. It's a little bit about price, but it's a lot about what's engaging with me. Why am I clicking on this one?
Yeah, I think more and more everything's being distributed through some kind of competitive marketplace, right? Whether it's the YouTube search results or Google search results or Amazon search or anything like that. And so really iterating on the creatives and the copy that the audience is seeing will make a tremendous difference, especially when you start factoring in the volume of, if you've got a lot of volume, really any fractional percentage is going to make a tremendous impact. And our polls are so cheap that the ROI is incredibly stupid in terms of the math, right? We had one Amazon seller who did a main image test, did some minor main image layout tweaks. Yes bar, actually, it's like a popular protein bar type thing, and the poll was like $60, and immediately had a 12% increase in.
Oh wow! So it's
rate.
not even 0.%; it's 12%. That's huge.
Increase in click-through rate. They didn't change anything else. They held everything else steady, and so all right, well that was easy. Like immediately more sales each day will make it back. So incredibly simple, and they didn't have to do anything with their packaging or branding or anything. They just kind of tweaked the layout, like shifted the angle that the package is in, and emphasized different things. So the smallest things can make a difference.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, so you mentioned before, like, so this was created because you didn't want to go to coffee shops, which I don't blame you on. Your family was sick of the questions. Sometimes you're so ingrained in, like I said, frustrated by your marketing podcast. Like, we did sort of shop it around at Skyline, but I knew what I wanted it to be because it's our tagline. But I'm also like way like entrenched in this, and maybe I'm, I have a bias because I've been doing, that's all I can see. Sometimes it'll get you out of your own head. And it'll say like, hey Jim, I know you think it's a really great name, but it's terrible. Like you should pick something else, or give you the thumbs up that like, hey, you're right on this one, because as a founder or as a creative that's, you've got your baby, like this is, and I've been doing, this is the name I want. It'll help you pick.
It's a sanity check, right? And even if it loses, at least you have the feedback on what the potential objections are going to be. And a lot of times we do have people who will pick, all right, well, I'm still going to go with this one. I'm fine with that feedback because maybe they look at the demographics of those people and it's not quite who they wanted to cater to anyways, or that was a fine polarizing thing that they wanted, right? So like, it's all just input. You're sort of the decision maker, but at least you have, that feedback ahead of time. And it's not something that you're going to read about in the reviews, like much later down the line. So it's just so that you have that heads up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say even the negative reviews or the negative feedback, like why they chose something else, like, in this world, there's so much choice, more and more to the point of like, it's becoming a problem. It's hard for us to focus, but me knowing why they picked B and me not wanting to be like B in that choice, I could almost take that and say like, oh, this is exactly why I need to do more of this. So
you need to lean even harder in the other direction, right? Like,
right. Because you want that person to pick your power bar or your podcast because they're right for you.
Exactly.
So sometimes hearing why they chose the competitor would be almost more helpful than why they would pick you.
Yeah.
So it's great.
It's never going to be 100%, right? And so you're trying to carve out your slice of the market and kind of like what your differentiating angle is going to be, and that's never going to resonate with everyone. So, you as a decider needs to pick what that's going to be, and frustration was what you wanted to lean into. So, like, you're not gonna change a tagline just because that turns some people off, right? Like you're going for the people who are frustrated by their marketing.
Exactly. And there are plenty of people that listen to marketing podcasts that are looking, it's the guy who says, I took 20 businesses to 7 figures in 2 years. And there's that financial guru type of thing. And that's not something that I've done. And it's not something that I talk about. And so you should go listen to that guy for that, that sort of marketing and financial combo, there's a lot of podcasts that do that. And so I think it's good to kind of, again, lean into your niche. So PickFu helps you do that, by both telling you what you're doing right and what, maybe what you're doing wrong, or maybe what others are doing right that are not your audience. And just knowing, picking your audiences, or I guess knowing your audience is what it helps you, I guess it helps you reinforce your knowledge of your audience.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah. And then make sure whatever you're putting out there is on what you expect it to be, right? And whether it's resonating, making sure like that that message is being communicated, or people can tell what the product does. And one of the funniest polls that I think is incredibly useful for a lot of people actually is we can do open-ended ones. You don't have to always compare. You could just put up something. And a lot of times agencies who are working with, let's say, product creators who have designed like their own packaging, they'll put up this test that, what do you think this is, and what do you think it does?
Ooh.
And they'll put up like their packaging, and it's invariably horrible, right? Because maybe the founder didn't have any design sense, and the feedback's always hilarious because like, I have no idea what it does, or they'll think it's something completely off. One example was this. It looked like a little rake, but because the image, you couldn't tell like what the sense of the scale was. So it looked like a rake. It looked like a back scratcher. It looked like one of those Zen sand things. And so, the feedback was all over the place. Like, what do you think this is? And there just wasn't enough context with the image of the packaging. And so, like, people don't know. If it shows up in the search results, like, I don't know what I'm getting. Like, is this a full-size rake? Am I clicking on a full-size rake, or is this a back scratcher? So it's funny to make sure that whatever you're putting out there is being communicated correctly. And a lot of times it isn't.
Of course, yes. And I would say the other sort of piece of this is when you're iterating is that the real world still exists as part of that's part of your focus group too. So It doesn't mean there's no, I'm assuming you agree with this, there's no right answer.
Yeah.
So you adjust your Amazon image, you get it out there, you grow by 12%. That doesn't mean that you can't take that, or maybe you lose. It doesn't mean, sometimes you could have the best focus group in the world, they can go in the wrong direction. For sure. And you learn from that too. So you then take that's your real life poll.
Yeah.
And now you bring that back in and you retest it again. Yeah. Like you now have, you can say, okay, we did that for a month, we grew by 5%. I want to grow by 10. What can we do now? This is telling me, I'm taking my Amazon demographic information. I can see that now all of a sudden we're not appealing to men anymore. Yeah. Maybe we went too female focused, or maybe we need 2 different product images. Or 2 different, that there's going to be, if you're really taking the time to think about this stuff, you're never going to be done, I guess. There's always another question to ask, I guess. And that's part of what you make really easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said earlier in the podcast, like these are all incredibly fast. So I think the one that I ran for you probably took a matter of minutes. So if you're doing 15 to 50 and it's, not too specific of an audience, it'll probably be done in 15, 30 minutes. If it's more targeted in a larger pool, it will take longer, but that is fast enough for you to go have your coffee, come back and iterate in the same day on variations, and much faster than going to the coffee shop and talking to people in person.
Right. And way faster than putting together your own focus group. And way cheaper. So one other thing that we had talked about last time was there are some examples. I don't even know if you've got them on top of your head, but sometimes people will see your product and then go buy from you, right? So again, if you're, these are people in the US that are purchasers, and they might see, they might have seen, of those 10 people that picked our podcast, some of them might be listening right now.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, let me check this out. And then, obviously there's no link there to do it, but they could do a search for you, or they could go and download your game, or they can go and buy your product on Amazon, which I think is sort of a nice little added bonus on the side, which is cool.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you so much for being on, Justin. I really appreciate it. I know that if people want to find you, they should go to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Type in Justin Chen. And if you go to PickFu.com, PickFu.com, you enter the code FBYM, you'll get 50% off your first PickFu. And I strongly suggest that everybody check this out and test it out. It doesn't have to be a big, I guess that's the other thing. It doesn't have to be like, I'm testing this like earth-shattering thing. Like test something. I'm always, I guess I'm anti over focus on data where people will spend more money than they'll save to analyze something. But this is a case where like you're going to get $15 back. Yeah. Like, there's almost nothing that would be worth testing that you won't get that return on. even if it's just to tell you that it's a bad idea. Now you've maybe saved, thousands of dollars because you're not going down the wrong path.
Yeah. So whatever you're working on, maybe it's a marketing campaign, maybe it's some new ads, branding, logos, even collateral. Like we'll test out collateral all the time if we're going to a conference, flyers, that kind of stuff, business cards. So like literally anything that's going to be published, printed, like put out in the real world, you could test it before, you get public eyes on it. And that private feedback is incredibly useful. So yeah, definitely give it a shot. Definitely guarantee that you'll get $15 worth.
Absolutely. So we'll have all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Justin. Check Justin out on LinkedIn. He's constantly talking about, he talks about remote work, which again is sort of a passion of mine. He's obviously talking about PickFu in general and just business in general, because this is there's very few businesses this wouldn't impact. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And again, I really appreciate you joining me. I'm so glad that I'm on this sort of podcast journey so I can meet cool people like you and learn about, businesses I had never heard of. And so I hope that more people learn about PickFu and you guys continue to grow and help other companies grow, which is, really at the basis of what you do. So Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Jeb.
I appreciate it. Okay. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time. Like, subscribe, check out Justin on LinkedIn, check out that link for PickFu, and we'll see you next time.